the first iteration of this, when we had 2 customers, we were literally just building web pages for people without even having the product available. Eventually, there's going to be this like interesting SaaS product. Right now, we're just going to do it for free.
Today we're talking with Yuxin Zhu of Replo. Prior to co-founding Replo, Yuxin was an engineering manager at Uber. Replo was Yuxin's second business venture with his co-founder Noah Gilmore. Noah and Yuxin were anxious to try another startup back in 2021, and Yuxin had enough experience with Shopify to know that building Shopify storefronts could be a chore. They were accepted into the summer 2021 batch of YC with the intent to build a low-code toolkit for Shopify. While Shopify is an incredibly powerful e-commerce model, some of its strongest features require significant development efforts. Replo productizes and automates that work, enabling users to quickly implement high-converting templates, A/B test their pages, and automate a variety of other tasks that a Shopify consultant would otherwise do repetitively.
Yuxin, good to see you. It's been a long time. And welcome. We're excited to have you. Yuxin, give us a little bit of background on yourself and then what that led into with respect to starting Replo and what that's been like.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Yuxin, and I'm one of the co-founders of Replo. Webflow.app is where you find us. And a little bit about me. I grew up in New York and went to Berkeley for computer science undergrad and met my co-founder there. And prior to this, I was a engineer/engineering manager at Uber. Was there for about 7 years. And after that, both my co-founder and I wanted to do something new. So ended up starting Replo about 2.5 years ago. And that's kind of where everything kicked off.
Very cool. What was the original idea for Replo? Was it what it is today? And yeah, how has that changed?
Yeah, I mean, so it was kind of similar. I mean, we always knew we kind of like wanted to work on something together. So back in college, we built a website that helped digitize Berkeley's course scheduling system, which was at the time built on a mainframe about 20 miles away on a phone network. And so we really kind of missed working together on kind of like these side projects and just like shooting the shit in the library at 2 a.m. And that was something that we kind of wanted to go back to, right? Even though we were a little bit older. And so at the time, like a friend and I actually ran an e-commerce business for a studio that was in the Mission in San Francisco. And we ended up helping them set up a Shopify store. And that was where I was like, okay, this is actually like extremely annoying. And so the original idea was actually just building something like Figma or Webflow or Squarespace, but integrated with Shopify and really allowing, designers and developers and marketing teams to like build kind of the brand that they wanted, because I've always been a closet designer. I really was into like kind of like making things look good and like on brand, and that wasn't really possible without probably a lot of code written on Shopify, which I think a lot of people probably don't know. And so like initially when we applied to YC, we were just like, okay, like what if we just took like kind of the Webflow Squarespace Wix experience and then integrated that really richly with Shopify data models so we can like pull out product information and prices and all of that. And we were like, maybe this is a venture scale thing, maybe it's not. But it'd be cool to like work on something that could make money and wasn't, something in Web3. So that was kind of like where it all started.
Got it. So the reason you started Replo was because you didn't want to be in Web3, is what I'm hearing.
I think I just come from, yeah, I mean, I come from an immigrant family, right? And so I think there was always this idea of like, you want to build something that like helps people around you. You want to build something that
it's like materially useful.
Yeah, materially useful. Though I'm probably going to get impaled by some Web3 community out there.
No, that's okay. From building this Shopify store for your friend,
yeah,
what were like the top 3 things that you wanted to integrate with the Webflow experience that would like 10x the experience of either just using something like Webflow or building it yourself or whatever it was? What was your thought process there?
Yeah, I mean, I think e-commerce was a little bit interesting because like I think Webflow is really a product like Webflow and Squarespace. It really caters to a lot of different people, right? And so you have people building their design portfolio on Webflow, people building, companies building their main marketing website on Webflow, right? And I think Webflow is tremendously useful in that regard. I think when you think about e-commerce, people are really thinking about like, how do I use this, real estate on the internet to like help me make more money, right? And so I think it's almost like a little bit of a different goal, because when a designer is putting up their portfolio on Webflow, it's like, hey, I want a surface on the internet to like talk about myself. Versus for e-commerce, it's like how do I make sure that everyone who visits, this is like a little bit reductionist, but how do I make sure that every customer, every user that visits this website converts into a paying customer? And so there's a lot more focus on analytics and conversion, and making sure that the storytelling is there, the merchandising is there, how you show your products and all of that stuff, information is there. And so there tends to be a lot more like dominant design theory on, okay, this is like the general user flow that people should go through. This is where people expect certain information, like reviews or testimonials or something like that. And so the initial concept was like, okay, cool. Like there's all these different pieces of software that people use on top of Shopify for this stuff. There's, internationalization, there's languages, there's like product information. And how do we actually like pull all of those different integrations together into a cohesive user experience? And that was not something that Webflow necessarily was focusing on. I think they were just focusing on a much larger market, right? Versus for us, we were like, we have to like kind of focus on this specific set of users.
Cool.
Sense,
cool. Yeah. Do you so I guess like when I think about our usage of Webflow in the early days of Highlight, we like right now we have a pretty custom, I guess, like landing page at this point.
Yeah.
But when we were building our original version of a Webflow site, we were like I always noticed that like the CMS aspect of Webflow was sort of very secondary and honestly not too easy to use.
Yeah.
It sort of seemed like something they sort of tacked on to make it more of like a dynamic experience. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
I would imagine that in Replo and explain, this is kind of like, I'm curious what the experience is like if I jump into Replo, right? But is it more like I can almost like enumerate all my products within the landing page to then style it? And is it like more embedded? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, kind of. So I think like being built on top of these, because being built on top of these like larger e-commerce platforms, like Shopify is a tremendously popular platform. And a lot of people think about Shopify as like, oh, I'm like throwing up a store online. Like Shopify's main value prop is like, you have this entire order management system that is built out that is much, much more advanced than anything Webflow has. And it's always on a spectrum, right? Because like if you're selling like hats online, it's like Squarespace and Webflow are perfectly fine. Like I actually recommend those solutions. If you're, a mid-market business doing somewhere between, 1 and, 1 million to like $1 billion, like Shopify is actually a very good solution there. And then obviously there's like the SAPs and Salesforces of the world, a more upstream. But even within Shopify, there's so much data that needs to be stored that is like not, that is not comfortably fit into like a traditional CMS model that maybe is in Webflow. So for example, there's products, but then there's like product prices. And then in different markets, there's like different prices because there's different currencies, there's different fulfillment. So for example, if you're ordering a protein bar in the West Coast, like maybe that goes to a different fulfillment center and maybe that has a different, shipping date attached to it. And so this becomes tremendously nested from an engineering point of view because there's so much like meta objects on, and there's also like a lot of tech debt within Shopify as well, right? So like this is not the most like clean kind of abstraction. And so like when we started on Shopify, we were like, well, we don't actually need to build all of this because Shopify already has it. And people actually prefer to manage this within Shopify because in addition to that, there's also like product reviews and buying, like selling plans. And like all of those are actually managed in Shopify adjacent companies, right? And so the value of Replo is that you're able to really have a really cohesive kind of design experience and analytics experience because we mainly focus on conversion rate optimization. We focus on how do we get your customers to like buy more of your product. And we can actually defer a lot of that to Shopify and these other platforms. And so people can come to Replo and be like, I want to hook up all the data I have within Shopify that, we've spent years putting together. And we don't really need to like be invested in that part of the business, which I think is as an early stage company is really advantageous because like that is like a whole other product that we could probably have built out that we didn't have to.
Got it. Yeah, that is pretty cool. It's almost like your database is this huge multi-billion dollar business that you're at the end of the day just surfacing to make it easier for people to then use their underlying infrastructure. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And people come now with other CMSs as well, right? So for example, Sanity or Contentful or like kind of these larger kind of Fortune 500 companies are using.
Yep.
Like we ran 3 different ads for the Super Bowl this past weekend. Like not all of their data was on Shopify, right? And so
Got it.
that type of like integration is actually really important for us because we're working in such a like kind of a mixed bag of ecosystems.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Makes sense. Well, Yuxin, the next thing I wanted to kind of cover, like kind of moving over from the actual product to maybe like your founder journey and things like that, is tell us a little bit about like what the first 6 months of Replo looked like. Once you quit your job and you're like, you and Noah are working on this full time or whatever, right? Like what when you had your first, let's say 5 customers, right? What did like customer support and what did the early inklings of the community look like and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, the first 6 months we did not have 5 customers, so I think the timeline's a little bit offset there. But
okay.
I
Well,
think
first 6 months,
yeah,
first 6 months to a year, or first 1 to 5 customers. You know what I mean?
yeah. I think it was really interesting because we actually kind of applied to YC. I mean, we did YC in summer of 2021, and we actually applied to YC not thinking we would get in. Like, I think like because we went to college in the Bay Area, like there's so many companies, so many friends that we knew that did YC in like 2008, 2009, right? Like when YC was a lot smaller. And so we always had this concept of like, okay, YC would be really cool to do, but like there's no way they would like accept us, right? I think they have like less than like a 1% acceptance rate or something. And so I think like we literally applied because we were like, all right, I think it would be helpful to fill out the application just to like get our heads around like what the fuck we were building. And we applied like effectively with 0 lines of code written. We talked to maybe 24 people on like, hey, this is like an interesting idea. I think we honestly got in on virtue of just Noah and I having worked together and YC just investing in founders that have worked together before. But once we got into YC, like we didn't actually have a product, right? And so and so much of YC, like there's such a diverse group of people that get into YC. There's people who are just like starting out. There's people who are like co-founder shopping. There's people who have like multi-million-dollar a year businesses. And there's like a lot of imposter syndrome going into YC because like our group partners would be like, hey, like you guys should like, get some contracts signed and like get some customers. And we were like, oh, we actually have like, like the README set up in our like code base this week, right? And so I think there was a huge kind of like imposter syndrome. There's a huge amount of like just us winging it to try and figure it out. And there was a long time where like we would talk to people and they're like, yeah, like, we're sold on this product. We don't like, this is exactly kind of what we needed. And we didn't actually have the product, right? And so like the first iteration of this when we had 2 customers was like we were literally just building these web pages for people without like we were just like building web pages for people without even having the product available. And we were just acting as, we were just consulting. And we were like, eventually there's going to be this like interesting SaaS product, but like right now we're just going to do it for free. And they were like, well, of course we're going to like let you do it for free because we would have paid, an agency $25,000 to build out this experience. But like you guys are doing it for free. And then if you guys, mess up, then you guys would just have to like do it some other way. Right. And so we were able to kind of like, I don't want to say trick, but like convince 3 customers to like do this. And that was kind of like the first year of the company because it was such a complicated product to build out. And like, I think once the product became, usable, that was probably like 6 to 9 months into kind of like the start of the company was when we were like, wow, this is actually like somewhat usable. And the iteration of that was like, not everything was usable, but like you were able to like update like the text on the page that we like had built by hand. And and then after that, people were like, okay, well now we're just gonna like recommend you as like a cheap service to like build landing pages and build customer acquisition funnels, right? Because we were like, we'll charge you guys like $1,000, and then the agency's like, we'll charge you guys like $20K, right? And so, and that was probably how we got our first like 4, customer 5. At that point, we were like, okay, well, we're spending so much time like manually building these websites and like not actually like building the product. And so we kind of went into a little bit of like a hibernation. Like that was also when we were bringing out our first kind of engineer outside of kind of the founders. But that was just like kind of like a like day in day out of doing that for a few months. And at some point, like, people started, like, the software became usable. Like, people actually went into the software themselves and started doing stuff. Like, at one point, we didn't even have like user signups. We just manually created accounts for people. Because we were like, user signups not important. Like, we have 5 customers. Like, who cares? And that like prioritization is really important when you start out, right? Because you're not going to be able to build everything at the same time.
Do you think you would have been able to understand the problem well enough to build it from the beginning if you hadn't done all that consulting first?
I don't think so. I think in hindsight, I think like there's revisionist history where we're like, oh, like, yeah, obviously that was not an important feature. But I think there was a lot of navigating as well, because if we did we did the consulting thing, and even then there was a lot of features that we were asked to build because we were effectively consultants, right? And so people would be like, hey, you should build this like pricing calculator thing that like could theoretically be useful in this product. And we were like, okay, well, we have no other choice, so we're just going to build it. But like, I think that we probably should have been better about, I think YC kind of teaches this thing where like you should like fire your customers in some ways, and really kind of be like very opinionated on like what you build and what you don't build. And I think we definitely fell into that trap because we were like, well, if we don't build it, we're going to lose like our like $100 a month contract. And like that's like deadly for the company because we have $150 of revenue a month, right?
But you were able to understand the problem in pretty good detail, right?
Yes. I think that was key. I mean, I think we had really good partners like early on, really good design partners that understood what we wanted to build. And that's really key because I think a lot of companies find design partners that are effectively just using them in some ways, to get whatever project they need done. And those customers will inevitably lead you astray because they're like, yeah, like this is theoretically something that could be useful for 500 other companies. And then you like start selling that product and they're like, this is completely useless, we don't care about this. And I think that is like a danger that a lot of companies within YC fall into, and a lot of investors as well, right? So
Yeah. And Eugen, I'm curious, like what did support look like at that time? So when you had these 5 customers that were paying you hundreds of dollars a month or whatever,
yeah.
right? Like, was it very like you're on a weekly call with each customer, just checking in and doing a lot of like hand holding kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, so between like customers 1 and 10, I would say like almost always when people, I mean, customer 1 we had nothing, customer 5 we had something, and customer 10 we had maybe 80% of what they needed. But like at every single step there was some gap in a product that they effectively deemed like as a deal breaker and we didn't actually have. And so we would, I think that the biggest thing, because we didn't have like, these weren't like our friends that we were selling to, these were effectively like warm intros that our existing customers made. It was really, really important to like establish trust in the beginning. And so we would like go out of our way to like get the like, they wanted the product, but they actually wanted like the end result of it, right? Which was, hey, we wanted to launch this new like landing page, new customer acquisition funnel for this campaign we're running, 2 weeks from now, and we need to just get that up. And so that was like the like most like important pressing thing, was like just delivering value to our customers, even if it was like on the back end some like totally hacked together thing. And then we would effectively have like weekly meetings. I had like a spreadsheet for like every single one of our customers. We would have weekly check-ins where we were like, hey, this is the status of like these current projects. And then like there was a point where we were like, hey, like let's help you get into the product and like start using it. And that was like a pretty clear kind of like delineation. We actually had to like fire one or two of our customers because we were like, okay, you're not actually using the product. You're kind of just like leveraging kind of the services that we provide. But over time, like that became less and less. Like I think by customer like 15, this was maybe like a year and 3 months ago. Like that was when we were like, oh wow, conceivably like you can actually do all of this yourself. And that was like a big moment for us because then we were like, oh, now we need to like build like user signups
and like market the product. Because
not even, it was just like people couldn't even like create accounts at that time. Like we were like ruthlessly prioritizing, right?
Very cool. Very cool. Nice.
But we were doing our own support until like just me and Noah, the co-founders, like until probably we had like 100 customers.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. What And what does support look like now compared to that? Like, is it very now like sort of transactional where it's like, you have some sort of chat bot and then you reply and then, yeah, like what does it look like now versus what it looked like before? Curious.
Yeah, I mean, we have like a very unorthodox support strategy, I would say, that is very different from like probably most SaaS companies out there. So we actually provide chat support to every single one of our users. And we're at over 2,000 customers now, and countless more, people who are just passing by. And that is, I don't know if that's like long term sustainable, but I think that is something that. So we have a team of overseas support people, like both in the U.S. and overseas. We have like multiple tiers of escalation. We might not get back to people, within a minute, but like we usually get back to people within a couple of hours at the latest, even when we're like overwhelmed. So we have a support team like of 7, 8 people around the world. We're growing that as well. But that was a probably like not unit economic friendly decision to make in some ways. But I think that was just from me and Noah just caring so much about getting user feedback, and that just kind of like never went away. It's not like a huge burden on the business, but I think it just gives us like even 1 or 2 insights a week where we look at tickets and we're like, hey, this is like what we should focus on. At this stage is still really, really important.
Very cool. Very cool. Nice. Nice. One thing that Yushin, I wanted to kind of double click on from earlier that you mentioned is stuff about like agencies, where you said
Hmm.
something where like agencies charge their customers a lot more, but then
Yeah,
they pay you for some amount. How does that
yeah.
work? I think that's pretty unique about your business. Do you mind talking to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think we didn't expect pretty early on. Was I think for the longest time we kind of assumed that agencies like so, and to define agencies here, because I think everyone has a different definition of what an agency is. So within kind of the e-commerce D2C kind of B2B kind of like e-commerce ecosystem, a lot of these companies are actually very small, right? And so they're generally like a solo founder or co-founder that builds a product that people want. Let's say a company like Hexclad, they're building pans, kitchenware, really really high quality kitchenware. They don't necessarily have, there's so much you need to do within e-commerce, right? And which is like a little bit different from software. Like you need to figure out how to actually build the thing. So like manufacturing, you need to figure out fulfillment, you need to figure out customer acquisition, you need to figure out customer retention, and all of those are like such deep rabbit holes, right? With customer acquisition, you need to go figure out how to do Facebook ads, TikTok ads. You need to figure out like how to get Gordon Ramsay on your masthead, and there's so many different things you need to figure out. And so when a lot of these e-commerce companies start out, and generally, I mean, like forever probably, they hire out a lot of that expertise to different agencies. So there's paid marketing agencies, there's agencies that figure out how to send your manufacturing to like Vietnam. Like there's all this the whole network of people, and it's actually quite a deep bench as well, because for example, when you do your branding as an e-commerce company, like branding is so important, because when you don't have good branding as an e-commerce company, like you're effectively a commoditized product. And so when people do branding, they're working with an agency in like New York or LA, and then those agencies will subcontract out like building the website to like more agencies like around the world. And so there's probably like hundreds of thousands of agencies, ranging from like companies like VaynerMedia. They have thousands of employees at this point, building, running campaigns for like the Super Bowl, like running campaigns for, ads on like every ad on TV you see is probably like 3 or 4 different agencies working together, all the way to like, freelancers that are building on Replo every single day. Right. And so there's quite a wide gamut of that. I would say with agencies specifically, um, I mean, so our platform is like such a huge kind of empowerment to these agencies, because previously they had to like, hire developers in house. A lot of e-commerce, like kind of performance marketing, is like about testing different flows, testing different ideas. It's like, okay, cool. What if we like, sold this product to someone on Facebook at a discount, but then like now they tried out our product, it's so amazing, they're going to keep coming back and buying more of it, right? And so there's all this like kind of merchandising strategy and campaign that you need to like kind of like you need to put thoughts into, and then you kind of just need to like test it. You're like, okay, cool, let's put $100,000 on this like experiment. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. We need to like measure this cohort across the next 6 months and figure out if they have positive LTV. all of that stuff, like you need to be able to test very, very, very quickly. It's not sustainable to do that when you have to like
Make a
design,
pod
build
when you
every
need
single
to,
page.
yeah,
Yeah. And
or
so
when you're also building the product that, like the physical product that you're
yeah,
selling to
exactly.
people.
And
Yeah,
like these agencies are also not they don't have like infinite people on their bench, right? It's like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
generally
yeah.
just a few people who have had experience building this stuff. So a tool like Replo, like that's just such a powerful kind of like people are like, I've saved like hundreds of hours of costs like on our team. I'm able to pass that off to our to our clients. I'm able to show them like, hey, here's all the different experiments I ran. Like we're really able to prove our value to them. And so a lot of our like users are actually just agencies working on behalf of other brands. And so that was like a very interesting kind of like go to market strategy for us as well, because now these agencies are going out and being like, hey, like, we are able to offer our services at a much lower rate because we're actually not charging you for the manpower that we put into building, these experiments. We're actually putting all of our resources onto strategy and like, figuring out like what things you should actually test. And then the actual cost of like running these tests becomes like very immaterial. And they're able to have a very competitive advantage because the agency space itself is very, very competitive, right? And so that was quite interesting. And these agencies actually effectively operate almost as our sales team. Like we've spent $0 on marketing in the entire history of the company, which like a lot of people don't know. So
Okay, I guess yeah. The next thing I wanted to talk about, Yushin, was about maybe more technical stuff about the product.
mhm,
Um, and so I guess like thinking about your product, um, it's like really complex, right?
yeah,
Like there's so many like components for people that don't know. Like I guess you guys know, maybe people know what Webflow is, right?
yeah,
But basically you have all these components and you need to drag and drop them in places, and presumably a lot of things could go wrong.
mhm.
Uh, so I'm curious, Yushin, how did you guys build this at the beginning, and how has that changed over time? Is it like a very like client side testing sort of strategy that you guys have built around it? And are there any sort of questions about performance, and how do you guys measure that? I'm more, and we don't have to spend too much time here, but I'm kind of
Yeah.
just curious how you think about that.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a very complicated product. And I think the issue with building complicated products is that once it becomes too complex, like you're not actually able to make progress on improving that product because you kind of in some ways have to like start from scratch. And I think that was like, I mean, I don't know if we definitely don't do this perfectly, but I think even when we started the company, we had some like very clear kind of I think the name of the game is like kind of creating very clean abstractions, right? And creating putting things into kind of like boxes and defining those boundaries very, very clearly. Because when you hire more engineers, when you hire more people on a team, like if these boundaries are very loose, like people are just like, whatever. Like I'll just like, call this function somewhere that isn't supposed to be called, and then your bundle size becomes like 3 GB. It's like there's just like weird things that happen. And as you grow the team, it just becomes more and more chaotic. So like making sure that like when people onboard, like there's a very clear kind of like architecture map that's laid out. Like this is kind of the system today. Here's where things are falling apart, and this is like where we're going the next 6 months, 12 months. Just so people have that like forward thinking like kind of vision where it's like, okay, like if I structure my code in this way, it's kind of like building a row of houses and you're kind of building it to the first floor, right? And you can come back later and add more features, but the foundation has to be really, really good. And so that's kind of how we think about, I think, system design and architecture and kind of making sure that things are in the right spots at a very high level. From a performance point of view and from like a user, like there's a countless number of like little user interactions that I think make tools that we really enjoy using in our lives. Like, I don't know, like Linear, for example, which is like a task management tool. Or like Figma or like Canva, like those tools, they're so good that like you don't notice the amount of thought that has gone into building that type of user experience. And most people don't think about it. But like when you use a tool that's like really bad, for instance, like Jira, right? Like, you know, I guess like big company, they probably make a lot of money, not a great user experience, right? I'm kind of shitting on them in real time. Like there's all these little things that come up where you're like, okay, this is like not what I expected, like how this should work. And you really like a single person has to be like the like dictator in that, right? Because like once these things start slipping, it just becomes a culture of like slipping. Like things like margins not being correct. It's like super subtle. It really doesn't matter. Like
But it gets
and
worse. Like,
it
yeah,
just
yeah,
gets
yeah.
worse,
And it
right?
gets
Because some
especially worse when you, like, if it's you and your co-founder, you can let it slip, I feel like. And
yeah.
I've had this experience too. But then once you start bringing on someone, a new person on the team, they don't have context on
Well, they're
what
also just
was,
like, I'm just gonna copy paste this component, and they like
yeah,
copy paste your like shitty
thing that
thing, and you're like,
wasn't,
oh
that
my
should
god,
be.
I knew this was shit, but like I didn't fix it,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
now it's
yeah.
like five places in a code base.
Yeah. How do
Um,
you, how did, on that note, I'm curious, like, so for our product at, like,
yeah,
with Highlight, we use our own product to monitor
yeah,
our own product, right? So it's almost like dog fooding built in, where it's like if
hmm
something's broken, it's very clear to us, I guess,
yeah,
to an extent.
yeah,
Um, how did you do that? Because I feel like you're not like an e-commerce. You didn't sell pans before this, right? You're an engineering manager and you did
yeah.
engineering stuff. So are there any sort of processes you've been put in place at Replo to where, I don't know, regular syncing sessions on parts of the product or whatever it is? But yeah, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think there's a few ways. I mean, obviously, like we use products like Highlight, shout out to you guys to like look at how people are using the product. I think that's actually very, very key because, people will, and that's partially why we still have chat support for people or like, support for everyone because we're just like, okay, like if someone writes in complaining about something, like they might be facing a specific issue in the product, but also there's probably like a general, like if we take a step back, like, some generalized, like, information architecture issue or like a reason why they were confused in the first place that Noah and I and Alicia, our product manager, just spot check throughout the week. There's every 2 weeks we have like a kind of a team get together where we all just try to build something in a product. And that's something that we do fairly consistently. And we just kind of have like a show and tell afterwards. It's like a 1 hour of everyone's time. I think it's actually very worth it because inevitably people are like, oh, like this is still not fixed after like a year. Like, why does this happen? Right. And someone just goes in like a Friday and fixes it. And they're like, okay, cool. This is finally fixed. And so, I mean, like, and then also for like some of our larger enterprise customers, like we do some kind of professional services to just get them onboarded. So for example, that falls currently into our customer success team. We have relationships with our agencies that we meet with on a bi-weekly basis, a lot of our experts, and they give us feedback on the product as well, right? And so that's like one of those things where like the Slack community, like people text me and they're like, yo, this experience is completely fucked. Please fix it. And we're like, oh yeah, like I forgot about that as a feature. Like it's just some like dark hole on the internet, right? So yeah. And I think that's just like staying close to your customers. It's like I think a lot of founders, once they, get past what investors perceive as like some important metrics, they're just like, oh yeah, now it's time to like outsource this to like a professional support person who like knows what they're doing. And it's like you
Yeah.
just gotta constantly be paranoid about this stuff.
Yeah. We do this thing called, I don't know why we call it this, but we call it Waterloo. And we do it every 2 weeks. And we basically like pull
Did
up
you
the
go to
product.
Waterloo, like the school?
No, it's
Okay.
because it's because all of our meetings are named after seltzer waters. So we
Okay.
started running out of seltzer water brands. And then Waterloo is like, I think the Sam's Club seltzer water brand or something. um, but yeah, basically we started doing that. Or basically, yeah, the point of this meeting was, we get on a Zoom call and then we go
Yeah.
into breakout rooms and we basically use Highlight to see how people
hmm
are using Highlight, and
Yeah.
we're just like super, super focused on, what's frustrating our customers. Oh, I shipped this feature 2 weeks ago. How's it being used today? And this was actually one of our engineers' ideas, Chris, early on. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of really turned into a cool, regular thing that the team is just like focused on it. Because I feel like the small things that these small fixes that you can do on a Friday
Yeah.
are also things that start to compound, and it's just, yeah, I feel like building that in the culture is also very important. But anyway,
Yeah. There's some form like top down and bottoms up planning. I do think that it becomes really difficult to like these things slip really, really easily because some product manager or some like even yourself, right? They're just like, okay, this is like not really worth our time to be doing this. And like it's the same thing with like like why we have support for like free customers. Like our investors are like, this is like not positive unit economics because you're not like getting paid for this. And we're like, yeah, we kind of know, but like also like this is not something that's going to destroy the company. And it actually, in a few cases, might be extremely levered in terms of feedback.
Oh yeah,
And
I mean,
like,
it's like the perception of Replo will get
yeah,
will be way better on.
yeah. And that's like an
But this is like
intangible value, right?
exactly. You can't.
Yeah,
Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah, your
Makes sense.
customers really understand that feeling like that. Oh, we trust
yeah,
Replo a lot.
yeah,
Which is not, you can't put a metric on that, unfortunately. I mean, we wish we could,
yeah,
but yeah, makes sense.
yeah.
Okay, Yujin, I'm gonna move over to, so we talked about support. We talked a little bit about like how Replo is built and your background and things like that. The last thing I want to talk about is the Replo community.
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing when we got on this earlier call with you a couple weeks ago, is you mentioned like, there's something particularly special happening in y'all's community, and maybe something that you didn't expect to have happened given the growth that you've seen in it and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, tell us about, from 5 to 20 customers or something, right? At that point, maybe you start to see the early inklings of the community. What were there any particular fun events that happened around that time that you want to talk about, and how did it grow from there?
Yeah, I think the most important event there was because when we started the company, we kind of assumed that in order to go to market, we're gonna have to like have some sort of sales motion. Um, and I think that was like, I don't know why we thought that. I think it's probably because that was how most YC companies went to market. Was the
Yeah,
founder hops on a call, like, and
especially
like
at
it's like
your
early
time.
on.
Yeah, especially I
Yeah,
feel like there was like 5 years, or even now, right? Most companies are either, yeah, it's like the B2B is like outbound sales is probably
yeah.
a good first bet for a YC partner to tell you to do, right?
Exactly. And also like when you don't have a product, like you kind of have to get on a call and be like, "Hey, I'm actually not a snake oil salesman," right? Like it's like inevitable you have to do that. And so I think when we kind of like started getting customers, we were like, okay, well, let's assume that we're just gonna have to like get on a call with everyone, and we would set up these custom Slack channels for everyone and all of that. And the thing with sales is that it's actually not super leveraged in the sense that like you spend an hour or 30 minutes with someone and it's kind of a one-on-one conversation. Generally, they're not like going out and telling their friends about the conversation. And even if they did, it's like you kind of have to like get on a call with all those people too in order to kind of like close the deal, right? And so I think the big events that happened that kind of changed our thinking there was like the first time someone posted on Twitter about us, like completely like like unprompted. Yeah. And it was just like, oh, like I just randomly found this like product from like I was at a barbecue or something and someone told me about this product and I used it and it's fucking amazing. And we were like, oh, that's like how the internet works. Um, the second biggest thing was at that point we probably had like 12 or 13 customers. I used to have my calendar on my website on the Replo website because we were so desperate for users. It was a sad moment in the company's history for sure. Where like we were kind of a year into this and we had like 12 customers. And the guy who like posted about us on Twitter, he like had dinner with a friend that day. This is all hearsay. And that guy like ran a newsletter that had maybe like 20,000 people on it. And he like put us in the footer of the newsletter as like hey, you should check this out. It's like just some fun piece of thing that I found over the weekend. And I had that week 65 demos booked on my calendar from that newsletter. And I was like, oh, first of all, I'm not getting anything done this week. But second of all, like that was cool because we were still doing kind of like the one-on-one sales motion, but like it was like someone randomly just talked about us on the internet, and that brought us people who were interested. And like honestly, the people who like half the people who booked the calls, they were like, I don't even know what you guys do, but like I heard about you guys, and like I trust what this guy says. And so I'm gonna like just schedule a meeting because I'm not doing anything Friday afternoon, right?
But presumably a good amount of them turned into real opportunities, right?
Yeah, they did. At that point, we were like, okay, well, we're not going to create Slack communities for like every single one of or Slack channels for every single one of these people because we used to create one-on-one Slack channels. And so we kind of like put people into this kind of like bucket where we're like, hey, you guys aren't paying yet, but like if you guys need help, like it's a lot easier to just like have a conversation on Slack, because we're already on Slack every day. And then after that, like people started inviting more people on their team because they would like start working on projects. They'd be like, hey, like I'm working on this thing, like check this out, like here's a link to that project. There was also like agencies that started joining because like they were like, hey, we're interested in this tool. And like we didn't really have like, they would go on my calendar and they wouldn't be able to find a spot. And we had the link to the Slack community at that point, like, which was, I think we called it like a debug channel or something. Like we just had it there, and then people would join and be like, at Yuxin, like, can you make some time, Monday morning at like 6 a.m. because we have this like project coming up. And then I think then it just kind of grew from there, because like once we were at like 50 people, then it was like a little bit easier to get to 100.
Yeah. And it's
then,
also the community thing is weird because I think, and we've noticed this too, there are two interesting things that happen. One, when a community is big enough, it getting bigger by that same order of magnitude becomes easier because they see that it's active and people were asking questions and things like that.
Yeah.
But then the second thing is that, and I don't know if this has happened for you, do people within your community help other people in the community?
Yes, that is definitely like an emergent behavior that happened. I would say though, like we did kind of hit a wall within our Slack community where I think over 1,000 people in there, like it became actually very difficult to like manage that community. So I think 1,000 was when people like, I don't know, like spammers started coming in, and like people like looking for like, because we have a huge agency network, we have a huge freelance network, and so there's a lot of like people that are just like, hey, I've like worked on 3 projects with clients on Replo, like doing all their paid marketing or whatever, and like I can work, and they'll like DM everyone, like they'll DM all 1,000 people, right? And so like it becomes like very difficult to manage because Slack has very poor community management tools. And we also couldn't switch to Discord because like most of our customers were not open source software developers or gamers or whatever, right? And so it was just like a different audience. And so I think that was something that became really challenging because people would be like, hey, there's like way too much spam in this channel. And that became something that we became very focused on, somewhere between like the 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000 mark. So yeah, there was a moment where people were leaving and we were like, oh shit, we should probably like not treat this as like a side show, basically.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Cool. And so when now that it's like pretty big, right? Like thousands of community members.
Yeah.
Do you have someone that's like manning it and like doing work around the community, or is it maybe now it's not as much you, but your co-founder or something like that? Like how did that work in terms of putting more focus on making sure it was high quality and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a community manager that kind of figures out not just the Slack community, but also how to make sure that people get connected to, experts and all of that. So we have a whole expert community now. We have like a referral program. And so like sometimes people come onto Replo and they're like, okay, I know exactly what I need to do. Like I've used this software like this before. I don't really need any help, right? And that's kind of like the ideal path. There's other people that hear about our product and they're like, oh, this unlocks like a huge amount of stuff for our organization. But I probably need, like, this is not an area that like I've historically focused on. Like a lot of e-commerce companies, they drive ads directly to the product page. It's not really optimized in any way. Customer acquisition costs are like going through the roof right now. And they're like, okay, like I am problem aware of like what the general problem is, but I'm not like exactly solution aware about like how to actually fix it. And so generally we'll pair them up with one of our agencies, or even like, like we don't really care if they use Replo or not, but like we're just trying to like, help them fix whatever problem they have. And so we'll pair them up. And so that's also what our community manager does, is like they'll go into Slack, figure out like, hey, these people are, like need help getting connected to, a fulfillment agency or a paid marketing agency. And we actually facilitate those conversations because I think it kind of just brings in, it's not quantitative right now. It's just like positive karma, honestly. But it also keeps the conversation going in the community, right? Which is really, really key.
Yuxin, yeah, thanks for your time, man.
Thanks.
This was really
thanks for
cool.
putting this together.
Yeah, there
you
were
guys
a
should
lot
keep
of
doing more of this.
I really like the customer service, customer success stuff. I feel like that's pretty unique for you guys. So
yeah,
appreciate it, and thank you for this short shill for highlight. We really also appreciate that. But yeah, we'll keep you updated on how our podcast journey sort of unfolds, and you should do the same with us. But thanks for your time, and have a nice weekend.
Keep me posted. You
Will
too.
do.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah. See you around,
man.
Chris. See you, Jay.